Hi, welcome back to the chapter 2 of the video about Geo knife. I want to circle back to a couple things that I omitted in chapter 1. First of all, this knife has no model name other than the number, and the model number is Geo 2401C. Correction, I just found out it's called Ethereal. Another thing I forgot to mention is it comes with a spare set of Omega springs, which is very nice. And lastly, I often watch other reviewers' videos right before I start working on my own about the same knife. And I saw at least one review by a young man named Rush Limbo or Rush Limbo. No, that wouldn't be it. Rush Limbo. Anyway, he did a very decent job hyping up this knife. But one thing in his video caught my eye. He mentioned that his knife had a placement or kind of semi-hidden placement for the pocket clip for the lefty carry. My copy doesn't have this feature, so lefties beware and email or call the company before purchasing the knife. All right, let's get back into the video. Starting with this here Hype Smasher. This is a modified arbor press and a clamping device that emulates a human grip. I test the knife function, there's no play, deploys well after reassembly. Yes, this has been reassembled after the hardness test. Like I said, I'm shooting the video a little bit out of sequence this time, so, you know, it happens sometimes. I am not running a certified laboratory here, and my devices are clearly homemade without any intent to pretend that I'm using some kind of industry standards for my tests. So positioning the knife in the clamp is important because we want it to sit firmly, but not rock solid. Just as it would be in your hand, the knife sits on steel rods clad in rubber hose material to emulate your hand's skeletal structure and musculature, in my non-medical opinion. I always check the lock for function after I clamp the knife, except in the cases where it cannot be accessed to be released, and that's resetting the lock also between each strike. The Hype Smasher is a modified arbor press. It has a 6-inch throat and a 2.5-pound ram that I drop because I removed the handle with its gear. But the knife is not sitting level with the table surface on the arbor press, so I mark on the ram, I mark how deep in the trough the knife is, so that all the knives I test experience the same force from the falling ram. Again, the force is quantifiable, 6 inches, 2.5 pounds. Free fall acceleration, you can calculate it yourself. Look up a free fall formula. Anyway, the method eliminates bias, personal bias. Data can have bias too, believe it or not. Like when a Leeb tester always measures to the same direction off of 0, verified by the Rockwell tester. But subjective bias is like me saying I don't like when people wear beanie hats when shooting videos. Videos they make a living off of while pretending to be engineering and philosophy experts. Well, to the subjective portion, I don't detect any blade play or change in the functionality of the knife after the test. But I would also like to point out that I polished the washers after I tested the hardness of the blade. And this reflects my bias or preference for a smoother running knife. This next test I highly not recommend for people who value their prized possessions or people who are trying to create an extremely positive image of a knife under review. Because this is probably or potentially is the most damaging test you can do to your blade. Better than the Tree of Doom that I used to do earlier in the channel's history. I'm applying pressure here, usually about 30 foot-pounds of torque, to lean the blade 15 degrees. That in turn exceeds military standard for combat blades, which require 9-degree bend. Rolling up my sleeve so that I can give you a good shot of me twisting the knife in the grip here. That puts extreme amount of torsional strain on all the knife's internal components and obviously on the blade. I apply as much force as my hand can apply. I don't know what that force is, but in this segment I don't stop at a certain angle. I twist as much as I can, and I do it with every knife to eliminate any kind of discrepancies from blade to blade as best I can. And to verify that there is no bending in the blade, I put it on a flat block and check if primary bevel lays flat on this block, thusly. So I apply pressure, the primary bevel is flat on the block, and sorry about the little camera adjustment here. Most blades I tested thusly did not bend permanently, but some did. And so that informs me that my experiment is pretty well designed here, because otherwise they would be all passing or all failing. And as you can see, the Geo blade did not sustain any permanent or plastic deformation. And so my initial opinion of this knife being well designed and manufactured is now supported by an objective and a repeatable demonstration. My apologies to Geo Knives for satin finishing the clip. I think it jives nicely with a satin accent on the blade. Let me know in the comments what you think about that. After all, the perception of aesthetics is highly subjective. And speaking of repeatability, I just added this air piston to my setup where I measure sharpness decrease or edge retention. Pretty self-explanatory, but you'll see in a minute. All right, so preparing the gauge and now making sure the air flows freely but consistently through the air piston. And now I'm setting my wrist firmly on the piston's top and lowering the blade, trying to keep the rate of descent as consistent as possible. 208 grams. That air piston is deadheading into the surface of my table. So I'm getting pretty consistent rate of descent here. Let's see. It's going to start right there. 228 grams. So I don't know if you noticed, but I moved the blade a little bit toward the right because I don't want to test in the same spot. I'm trying to get the average condition of the edge. So I'm picking 3 random spots. And for the last push here, steady, steady, we got 251. And here's another improvement for the sake of accuracy and repeatability. I added the weight to my buckhorn or antler. This is going to give me 20 ounces plus or minus 1 ounce consistent downward pressure when I torture the edge with it. I think it's important to point out that variability still exists though. Just as before, I'm going to do 10 back and forth passes for 20 total. You can count with me. Meanwhile, I'd like to thank everyone who hits the like and subscribes to my videos. I really appreciate your support. Thanks for coming here for independent, unaffiliated, and unbiased, or as little bias as possible reviews. Alright, we're ready to rock and roll or push and cut again. Now with a decreased sharpness. Let's see what it amounts to. Again, I'm keeping the rate as consistent as humanly possible with the aid of the air piston. 322 grams on the first cut. And because I have like a telltale sticker on the front of the blade, I can tell that I'm cutting close to the second random position from the first series of cuts. That was 366 grams. And now we're moving on to the last cut. Again, same setup. In we go. 342 grams. Well, the sharpness was reduced by 49.7%. That is not particularly great, and probably because the blade that you see here was overstropped at the factory. Yours may be different. And this is a surprise for those of you who lasted that long through the video. I set up my Rockwell tester. It is level as indicated by the bubble on the left. It's calibrated with the NIST certified blocks. I'll have a separate video about that. So I'm going through the motions of testing Geo blade. I will explain all the details in the detailed video, but for now, the important thing to remember that the small hand down there on a small dial has to line up with the red dot, and the big hand is adjusted to the C or the center of the C scale. And then when I trigger the descent of the die, I set it up so that it runs 10 seconds to apply main load. And it requires to pull it back for 4 seconds to release the load gently. I get 61.5 HRC on the first pull. And setting up for the next one. Here, the important thing to remember is when you're adjusting the primary load or minor load, you have to make sure that the big hand rotates at least 3 times around the dial, and then it remains within 5 HRC scale dividers from the center. Otherwise, you have to reset it in a different spot, which would indicate a surface imperfection. Anyone who doesn't do it in their test or doesn't show it in their test is misleading you into believing that they are following some kind of industry standard procedure. 10 seconds to descend the major load, and now 4 seconds to pull it back. And here we are at 61.9 HRC. So I am reading higher than my Leeb readings. Again, this is a topic for future discussion. In this video, I'm just addressing this specific blade. And as I promised, the disclaimer is this is my blade. It's a sample of one. There's no way to guarantee that all their blades fall in the same hardness range. They could be higher, they could be lower. And that is why it's still not an industry standard test. Because if I was part of that industry, working for ISO certified organization or any kind of quality control system certified organization, I would have to take a statistic sample of 5 or more, depending on the lot size. And here we are at 61.8 HRC. And I have to say, even though it may sound biased, this is the ideal hardness range for M390 steel. Here's the result. You can see that it's the same blade. You can see the Rockwell penetrating indentations on the left and much less pronounced divots from the Leeb testing. And just so that you know, I refinished that area using diamond plate so that there is no surface discrepancy. And now it's time to tally up the score. The blend length under 3 inches gets at a point, weight under 4 ounces as well. Edge to weight ratio is 0.92, which is decent. One hand into the pocket, as you saw, I could do it, but the force was excessive, so 0 points there. But it has a strong in-pocket retention. There are 3 ways to open this knife: by using thumb studs, reverse flicking, and pulling the lock back. The detent force was in a good range. It is as finger safe as it gets. No smasher unlock on the smasher test. No damage. The steel is complex alloy, premium steel. It's powder metallurgy steel. And a heat treat was in an excellent range. The tip survived the bending moment. Blade remains straight. And there is no play afterwards. The edge retention is mediocre, only 1 point there. 18.5 thousandths of an inch behind the edge thickness gets it an extra point. It's a mid-height saber grind, so no points there. The effective edge in my knuckle test was over half the blade's length, so a point definitely well earned. Now we're in the joy adjustment factors. Each gives a 10% bump. Definitely high quality of assembly. There are no bragging rights associated with this brand yet. It is very corrosion resistant system between titanium handles, M390 blade, and bronze washers. The blade shape definitely gets it a bump. It's a very universal, classic Bowie knife shape. And at the time of filming this video, the retail price of this knife is 125 bucks. All right, let's see how it stacks up against all the other knives I tested. Let's sort our column here to see what place it ended up in. Whoa, I did not expect that. It is in a third place now, just behind Oz Machine Rosie. So how did it do in the joy and bragging rights department? Let's sort on that column. Well, it's coming in the 6th place, right behind the Fender, which I will need to revisit soon. And the next is bang for the buck, or price divided by the score. And it is still reasonably high up at the 8th position. All right, let's get back to the primary score and resort the column. A very happy placement here. Thank you, Geo Knives, for sending me this knife, and let's hope as a community that other reviewers don't hype it up to where they will start raising those prices. I hope everyone who watched this video to the end carried something out of it for themselves. I covered important topics such as repeatability of testing, using objective parameters to evaluate something, and reducing bias by consistently repeating the same test from one gear review item to the next. Let me know in the comments what you think about it, and I also would like to know if the majority of my viewers would be interested in a full-up video on how Rockwell Testers operates, all the pitfalls that could face a user, all the calibration aspects, and etc.